This special broadcast of U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski's address to the Alaska State Legislature is produced by KTOO Television in Juneau and the Alaska Public Radio Network. I'm Rosemary Alexander, KTOO News Director. With me is Dave Donaldson, State Capitol Correspondent for Alaska Public Radio Network. Dave, I believe this is your 20th session, and that means
Yes.
20 addresses.
20 speeches and 20, yes, a long time. Way too many.
But Senator Murkowski is now Alaska's senior senator and a member of the Republican leadership group. Dave, why don't you fill us in a little bit?
Well, let's see. We could start with her first day on the job here as a representative. Yes. Now, Senator Murkowski's, before we do that, let's explain the background stuff here and what people are actually seeing on television and for people on radio. Sometimes the organizations just don't work too smoothly, and for some reason we are just starting to see the Senate people arrive. It's kind of a madhouse on the floor and a lot of people around us here, but eventually they will sit down and they will listen to the speech.
Usually the senators are here a lot earlier than this. We know the senator is here herself,
Yeah.
despite some fog in Juneau. She landed last evening, and there is a reception this morning.
Yeah, and she's she's been making the rounds, greeting people, and of course a lot of people are still here who were here when she was a member and actually elected as the majority leader at one time, just before she had her first was sworn into the U.S. Senate. She never served because of the timing of it, but she's still well known, well liked by members, Democrats and Republicans both. We are expecting her to talk an awful lot about energy today. That's been the indication that we're getting from her staff. We have not seen an advance of the speech or anything like that, but we're supposed to hear a lot about energy. I know that she has been very, very interested in, of course, the gas line, oil production, this sort of stuff. But also on some alternative energies. I know that she has been an early supporter of nuclear projects around the country. We noticed the Obama administration provided loan guarantees yesterday or day before,
Yes,
for some nuclear projects. Well, finally they found their gavel and
Gavelled in. We're still waiting for some senators to seat themselves, and we expect that Senator Murkowski will be ushered into the chambers momentarily.
We've got some formalities to go through here. They've got to excuse people and all this kind of stuff, so it's not going to be great moments of drama at this point. But
In accordance with the provisions of Uniform Rule 51, I turn the gavel over to the President of the Senate, the Honorable Gary Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the joint session please come to order? The purpose of this joint session is to hear an address by the Honorable Lisa Murkowski, United States Senator. Senator Ellis.
Good morning, Mr. President. I move and ask unanimous consent that the roll call of the Senate be waived and all members be shown as present.
Without objection, so ordered. Representative Johansson.
Mr. President, I move and ask unanimous consent the roll call of the House be waived and all members be shown as present.
Without objection, so ordered. Will Representative Herron and Senator McGuire please escort the Honorable Senator Murkowski to this joint session? So she flew in last night, then, I guess. Yeah. Also, yeah. I don't know if she's made it today.
what we're watching now is just simply a little formality. They actually have to be invited into the chambers. And so here is her announcement that she's been invited and escorted in by some members. And finally, Senator Murkowski's arriving.
Senator Murkowski is making her rounds saying hello to various members of the House and Senate and is now approaching.
It's a great pleasure to
Podium.
welcome Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Good morning. It looks different, doesn't it? Are you used to it by now? And that is very disconcerting. Jeez. Where did that come from? Oh, it's a pleasure to be back home with you. We've had an opportunity to have coffee and donuts in the back room, get a little sugared and caffeinated before I give my annual address to you. But I always come back to Juneau with a real sense of coming home. And sometimes I need to kind of pull back and remember that I am working back here in back there in Washington, D.C., and not here with you anymore. I miss that. I miss that, my friends. President Stevens, Speaker Chenault, all my friends in the legislature, it's great to be back home. To our fellow Alaskans that are watching on Gavel to Gavel, listening on APRN, KTOO, I want to thank you for inviting me into your home, because our technology allows that nowadays, and it's wonderful. It's a good thing. Now, it would not be a legislative address from me if I didn't first give you the family update. And I don't know if you all got the Christmas card, so if you didn't, you now get the update. Nick is a freshman in college, if you can believe it, 6'5". 6'5", he's taller than Vern, so very proud of him. He was working on a commercial fishing boat this year, and life lessons. It was really good. Our younger son, Matt, is a junior in high school. Also hard to believe, but he's doing exceptionally well. Learned the skills of washing dishes and waiting tables and working hard, and that's a good thing. Vern is, last project he was on was replacing all of the windows in the house. We're getting into the weatherization credits. It's a good thing until the weather stops you dead. In Washington, D.C., the snow stops everything. So we got the windows kind of half in, half out, which is not good. Vern is working hard. Had a chance to see my parents this weekend. Mom broke her leg, and Dad is a really lousy nurse. So we're really feeling sorry for Mom right now. But I give you these updates because it really is my family that grounds me so, and those of you who know me know that well. I want to take a moment this morning to recognize another Alaska family that is gathering this morning as we speak in Anchorage. A family that tragically lost a loved one this weekend. Jim Bowles, as you know, was taken in an exceptionally tragic accident. And when we have aggressive acts of nature that take people from us, it's tragic, but it's even more doubly tragic when it's people that we know, friends, people that we have worked with, leaders in the business communities. And so this morning I wanted to take just a moment and recognize Jim Bowles and let Kathy know that our prayers are with her and her daughters and her grandchildren. Things are serious in Washington right now. Things are serious, they're weighty. Our nation faces some unprecedented challenges on a global scale. Our intelligence community predicts that Al-Qaeda will attempt another attack on the United States within 3 to 6 months. We contend with the threat of Iran as a nuclear power in the Middle East. We've got decisions that we have to make on the future of our involvement in Afghanistan and in Iraq. As we investigate the attempted Christmas Day bombing, we question how we failed to keep the terrorist off that plane. We're waking to the implications of China's growing economic and military power. We're recognizing the responsibility that we have to help the nation of Haiti, which is just a mere 750 miles from our shore as they recover from that devastating earthquake. And with these very weighty global challenges, we also face an economic crisis here at home. And while I'm hopeful that our nation may be beginning its economic recovery, January's national unemployment rate of 9.7%, it's nothing to celebrate. You can't brag about an economic recovery when people are still losing their jobs and they can't pay their mortgages. It's been described as a statistical recovery and a human recession. From Kotzebue to Key West, from Bakersfield to Bangor, the American people, they're sending us a pretty clear message, a pretty clear direction. They're saying the economy is your #1 challenge. Fix it. Just fix it. But I'll tell you, the strategy that we have in Washington, at least thus far, has been fundamentally flawed. The federal government has a habit of taking a short-term approach to engineering an economic recovery. We spend a bunch of money, we run the deficit higher, and we hope that businesses will pay it back in taxes. In Washington, hope springs eternal that the economy will boom before people realize that it's busted. On Main Street, that's just not selling. In the aftermath of TARP, the bank bailout, the failed stimulus last winter, the huge cost of the health care bill, we, the people, are skeptical that the massive deficit spending will lead us to prosperity. And we, the people, are increasingly concerned about the mountain of federal debt that this strategy imposes upon our children. If you look at the national debt calculators that are out there, you go on the internet and you can find them. You for instance, take a person like my son Matt, a junior in high school. Matt already owes more than $40,000 of our national debt. Well, folks, that's not chump change. It's time for some real change. No more failed stimulus plans. Let's focus on improving the fundamentals of our economy. Now, in order to revitalize our economy, we must remain committed to the tax incentives that encourage American enterprise and job creation. We should enact regulatory reform, lawsuit reform, and really wake up to the fact that growth in government does not create wealth. America cannot and should not take economic prosperity for granted in this 21st century. We've got countries like Brazil and Russia and India that are moving up quickly, very quickly, while our economy stagnates and our policies send our jobs overseas. Now, in Alaska, we too need to do some soul searching about the future of our economy. And while in many respects we are faring better than the rest of the nation in this economic downturn, our unemployment figures suggest that we're not immune to the troubles in the lower 48, and I think all of you recognize that. January's edition of Alaska's Economic Trends said, Alaska's 21-year streak of job growth ended in 2009. It was a good run. Well, those words really should be a wake-up call to all of us. We're proud here in this state to claim the title of the last frontier. Alaska remains less settled, both literally and figuratively, than any other state. And that's a point of pride. It's a source of opportunity. But it's also some risk there. The course of our economy is less established than any other state. We've got great infrastructure needs and an expensive place to do business. And we're still the last frontier when it comes to attracting investment capital and new industries. We've been a sovereign state for over 50 years, and yet the federal government continues to exert an often oppressive level of influence over our economic choices. Roughly 60% of our lands remains in federal hands, and federal regulations and restrictions restrain economic and resource development throughout our state. so-called public interest litigation groups. They look at Alaska as fertile territory, as fertile ground to push the edges of environmental advocacy, perhaps without regard to the Alaskans who may be hurt by the outcome. And these groups have long enjoyed a pretty sympathetic ear in the Ninth Circuit. And you add insult to injury when they succeed in establishing these gotcha precedents, and then the U.S. taxpayer is required to pay for those expenses. I think we're probably going to need a sea change in Congress to make it happen, but I will not drop my fight to move Alaska out of the Ninth Circuit. I think it's so important that we break from the Ninth. Now, Alaska's future is also challenged by a myriad of problems that face our people. We know that high rates of fetal alcohol disorders, 4 times the national average here in our state. In fact, just down at the convention center here, we have the Southeast FASD conference going on right now for the next 3 days. And fetal alcohol syndrome is one of those that it's just so troubling. We haven't figured out a cure for cancer, but when it comes to fetal alcohol syndrome, we know how to prevent it. You simply consume no alcohol during pregnancy. And yet we can't seem to get this message across. We've got so much more to do there. Far, far, far too many Alaskans also come home to the reality of domestic violence. And I want to acknowledge Governor Parnell for taking this issue head on. Anna, I know you have been working on it here in the legislature and prior to. We have so much that we can and must do in this area. We've got a dropout rate in our Alaskan schools that is one of the most disappointing in the nation. Again, unacceptable. And for decades, we've known that vocational and technical education can offer the promise of a fulfilling career to so many Alaskans, but we've been slow in making those opportunities available in many places. Now, the strength of any state lies in its ability to support good-paying jobs, to provide that skilled and educated workforce, and also to promote healthy families and really healthy communities. It's this 3-legged stool type of a concept. And this morning, I want to focus on the economy side of our 3-legged stool, the jobs piece. Because if our economy is weak, our ability to educate and to care for our Alaskan families is compromised. It's just as simple as that. Now, ICER, the Institute for Social and Economic Research, they've also kind of taken the 3-legged stool approach to identify the 3 components of the Alaska economy. First is petroleum, which, as we know, supplies most of our income. Then the second leg is the other private industry, and included in all of this are the jobs in mining and in tourism, fishing, air cargo, timber. And then the third is government, the ever-present government. So let's start with petroleum first. Anchorage Daily News editorial says that Alaska without oil is like Florida without sunshine. It's unthinkable. On a national level, it's probably no overstatement to say that the industry is under attack. It's not politically correct to champion domestic production these days, and it's something that I have been attacked for on a personal level. I agree. I absolutely agree that over time, oil will and should steadily decline as a percentage of our total energy mix. I want our vehicles to be battery powered. I want to dramatically increase our use of renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar, biomass, geothermal. The opportunities out there are boundless, and that's good. But by anyone's most optimistic estimates, America is going to continue to need large amounts of oil and gas for decades to come. And for the sake of our nation's economy, for the sake of our national security, and I very strongly believe for the sake of the world's environment, the more of America's oil supply that we produce domestically, the better off we are. Too many. Too many, however, seem to think that if we simply shut down drilling, that our need for oil will somehow magically vanish, rather than to shift to an ever-increasing reliance on foreign imports. And this kind of thinking may explain why the White House is proposing over $80 billion in new taxes and fees that target the oil industry. It could explain why, after years of the ANWR opponents arguing that no, don't go to ANWR, go over to NPRA instead, it may explain why the federal government has denied the very permits at CD5 that would allow for the initial development in the NPRA. Think about it. Heaven's sakes, if we can't drill in the National Petroleum Reserve, an area that was specifically designated by Congress for oil and gas production, where can we drill? We need to ask that question. Where do we end up? It could explain the EPA's continuing to move the goalposts on Shell's air quality permits, actions that could effectively prevent offshore development in the Chukchi and the Beaufort, with implications on offshore drilling nationwide. I think this strain of thinking has infected the effort to list and designate critical habitat for polar bear, for walrus, for the beluga whale, which we know pose a giant federal hammer over a multitude of Alaskan projects. We all know, you all know, that TAP's throughput is declining, and there are days when that throughput falls below 500,000 barrels per day, causing significant operational problems when it's cold. We know we got to get more oil into that line. It's as simple as that. And when the President spoke at the State of the Union just about a month or so ago, I was pleased by his comments about the Outer Continental Shelf development in his address. But I do remain skeptical about whether the President's words will translate to agency actions to ensure our national security. I intend to work hard to ensure that offshore development is allowed to proceed, and to proceed in harmony with the cultural traditions of our native people from up north. These goals are not mutually exclusive. But even if Alaska's offshore development goes as planned, it will still be a decade before those resources reach TAPS. And in the meantime, it's critical that Alaska do its part to maintain the viability of our petroleum industry, so that the producers have got a reason to stay, and that those global companies who have not been involved in Alaska have a reason to come. Now, I'll do my part in Washington, D.C. by fighting against any new taxes on the oil and gas industry that threaten to make Alaska and therefore, well, threaten to make America and therefore Alaska one of the least desirable places in the world to explore and to develop. And I'm going to fight for OCS revenue sharing for Alaska and for the other coastal states. And of course, I will never give up the fight to open up ANWR. It's the right thing to do for this country. It's the right thing to do for Alaska. So, talking about petroleum here for a while, let's talk about Alaska's long-term energy future. In the 21st century, gas will become one of the world's dominant energy resources, and Alaska must be a player on that world energy scene. We've got to get our gas to market. Now, I've included $30 billion in loan guarantees, improved inflation proofing for the gas line. We've got this included in the Senate energy bill that is in place. I have repeatedly engaged the White House at all levels on the importance of the gas line. I continually ask all the parties, everyone who is involved, what more can be done at a federal level to make the gas line a reality. Now, you all know the recent news about the cost of the project, certainly the competition from other gas finds in the lower 48, but this news isn't reason to give up or to be distracted. The gas line continues to enjoy strong support from energy companies, from certainly my colleagues back in Congress on both sides, House and Senate, and the President has clearly given his support. And even though shale gas is coming online, our gas, Alaska's gas, still has a critical role to play. I believe that the abundance of gas that we will see will cause the industrial sectors, whether it's from trucking or power generation, to convert to natural gas, creating a more stable market where Alaska gas, shale gas, and foreign LNG will all find their market. So while the window for a gas line remains open, that shouldn't be viewed as an invitation to procrastinate. Maybe America can wait for Alaska's natural gas. Perhaps industry can wait. But Alaska cannot wait. We can't wait because other parts of our state's economy are not to South Central. That balance is disrupted, and ultimately our economy will decline. Now, ICER tells us that 31% of Alaska's jobs are dependent on this one industry. 31%. The industry accounts for a third of Alaska's gross state product, fuels 60% of the private investment in our state. The thoughtful development of our energy resources has brought more than $141 billion in revenues to the state of Alaska. And as we think about that, as we consider those numbers, I think it's important to remember how easy it could be for all of this to become yesterday's news. Now, put it juxtaposed to another industry here in the state of Alaska. In 1972, the Southeast timber industry was one of the largest economic drivers in the state. In just 20 years later, in 1990, timber jobs hit an all-time high in terms of employment. Now we have but just a few small mills left, and they're scratching desperately to hang on. Kyle and Peggy, Bert, you all know there's so little left there. And many of those same outside forces that killed the timber, opposition, whether it was from environmentalists, from misguided federal management, alternative supplies from abroad, these all now target our state's oil industry. Now, I know that you all are faced with hard decisions this session about how to protect what we have and how to build Alaska's economy for the future. And I stand ready to work with you as we advance all that. As important as petroleum is to Alaska, we certainly can't minimize the importance of the other sectors of our economy. Our visitor industry, hugely important, particularly here in Southeast, but all over the state. Our visitor industry has grown rapidly over the past 20 years, and with it we've seen the impacts, the support to hotels and restaurants and retail, local government. But the visitor industry is perhaps the sector of our Alaskan economy that is impacted most by the national recession. As Americans in the lower 48 have less disposable income to spend, that big Before I Die trip, remember when we had that media campaign, the Before I Die trip to Alaska just isn't going to make the cut. And it's so important for us at the national level to be championing these sound economic policies that are going to help us here at home. We also need to do more to make Alaska attractive to those international visitors, to those whose disposable income is perhaps increasing and who view Alaska as that year-round tourist destination. Let's move to another sector, mining, minerals. With minerals, the United States is going down that same path of dependency on foreign countries as we currently are with our oil. The approval process for a mine here in the United States is one of the longest in the world. We've got an average wait time here in this country of about 7 years to permit out a mine, and we know here our own experience in the state. But it's very easy then to understand why companies will look elsewhere, outside of the United States, for their raw minerals. In Alaska, we're continuing to wrestle with the fact that we have such abundant mineral resources, but how we develop in a manner that is consistent with our needs and our values, compatible with those. Just yesterday, we learned that several groups appealed an EPA decision to grant Red Dog Mine a permit. These are decisions, I think, that we recognize we have to resolve as a state, push back against those outside interests that would attempt to pit Alaskan against Alaskan. And here in Juneau is an example of where things came together. The community came together to fight for the Kensington mine, went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I personally met with the administrator of the EPA when it looked like there was going to be a fresh attempt at further delay. You were rewarded with the first significant new employment opportunity that Southeast has seen in a decade. And it's that kind of consensus that I would hope can be built elsewhere in the state. We need to work towards that. Commercial fishing always has its ups and downs, but I think truly remains a bright star. We were just delighted about a week ago with the news that the Target stores nationwide are going to sell only Alaska salmon in their stores. That's a big deal and something to celebrate. Now we need to work on Walmart and Safeway and everybody else, but we'll continue that. But when you think about our fight for statehood, that fight was in part to assert our sovereignty over Alaska's fisheries. And for 50 years, we've managed those fisheries with an absolute commitment to conservation, and today they're recognized as the best managed fisheries in the world, and the world is rewarding us for that. I mentioned just very briefly the state of the timber industry, and I will tell you, this is one area of our economy that is a source of deep frustration for me. We've got seemingly endless appeals, lawsuits, policy revisions that have prevented small local mills from gaining a dependable supply of timber to maintain jobs within the region. Just last year, a new suit was filed to override a court settlement and impose new roadless policies within the region. I applaud the state for making it very clear, crystal clear, that you expect this administration to follow the terms of the Tongass Land Management Plan and permit enough timber to be harvested to maintain a viable industry. And we've got a process in place, the Tongass Futures Roundtable, and I support their efforts to develop a long-term land plan, a plan that will hopefully break this vicious cycle of the appeals and the litigation. But I know that our family-owned mills are truly on their last leg. And I encourage the stakeholders in that process to work as quickly as possible to forge a consensus. But until some agreement is reached, we've got to redouble our efforts to figure out how we maintain a viable timber industry within the area. I've been seeking federal aid to help the industry make this transition. But if timber's allowed to die there, the industrial base, the limited industrial base in the region, will be so weakened that any economic development strategy in the Panhandle is going to be very, very hard to succeed. Last leg of our three-legged economy stool is government. And I guess some continue to view the federal government's involvement here in Alaska as one giant earmark that could perhaps go away at any moment. I don't see it that way. For better in many cases, for worse in others, the federal government is here to stay. We remain one of the best investments that America's ever made. And that's not just because of our our abundant resources like oil and gas and minerals. Back in 1935, General Billy Mitchell referred to Alaska as the most strategic place in the world because of our geographic proximity to the world's trouble spots. That was true in 1935. It's even more so true today. This month, we're welcoming members of the 4th Airborne Brigade Combat Team back to Fort Richardson. They've been in Afghanistan for a year. Last fall, we welcomed the 1st Stryker Brigade back to Fort Wainwright after a year in Iraq. And we recognize that their performance on the battlefield was outstanding. They made all Alaskans and all Americans proud. Their commanders say, they acknowledge where they're coming from out of Alaska, but they say, you know, it's something about Alaska. Something about Alaska. We provide not only an optimal training environment, but we take care of our military families with a level of community support that is simply not found anywhere else. And those of you in the interior, those of you in the Anchorage area where we have significant military populations, I think you know that very well. And we're so right to be so proud of our community for how we embrace our military men and women and their families. And it's not just the best troops that the military has to offer. Alaska remains an incubator for top military leadership. All you need to do is look around in the Department of Defense, Pentagon, the people that are making things happen in the military, in the world, in the country today. People like Norty Schwartz, Howie Chandler, Doug Frazier, Chuck Jacoby. These were all men who spent time with us. We claim them as Alaskans, and proudly so. And they have gone on and truly are doing remarkable things for our nation. And it's not just the top brass that impress us so. I was in Afghanistan just a little less than a month ago, and we were flying down to the southern part of the country into the Helmand province, the area where the big offensive is going now in Marja. And we were going to get into an Osprey. And oh my gosh, what a flying machine. We were walking over to the Osprey, and there's a young Marine who comes running up to me. Ma'am, I just want to introduce myself, ma'am. I'm from Big Lake. And then before I could get his name or shake his hand or take a picture, he races off because he's the flight crew on this Osprey. And your heart just bursts with pride looking at this young Alaskan from Big Lake who's there in Leatherneck Bastion. It's just phenomenal. Every year, to ensure that we make the best use of our strategic location here in Alaska, I fight to secure the hundreds of millions of dollars of military construction funds that are so necessary. Alaska has earned our role in the defense of America through decades of solid performance. Now, in addition to our military, the United States Constitution explicitly recognizes the special responsibility of the federal government towards Alaska Native peoples. The federal government fulfills this responsibility through ongoing financial support for tribes and tribal organizations. Nearly 20% of Alaska's First Peoples nearly 20% of our population are Alaska's First Peoples. More tribes reside within our borders than any other state in the Union. And these expenditures ripple through both the urban and the rural economies, benefiting a great many Alaskans. And another constituency, our veterans, our military retirees. The nation owes a special debt to these men and women. Alaskans have served with distinction in the armed services for generations, and we have more veterans per capita than any other state in the Union. But sometimes it seems that our veterans are out of sight, out of mind when it comes to their earned benefits. And over this past year, I led, along with Senator Begich and Congressman Young, led that fight to restore retirement benefits for the Alaska Territorial Guard. I was very gratified from the support that we received from the Alaska Legislature. You made sure that there was no member of the Territorial Guard that lost his benefits during the year that it took to make things right. So I thank you very, very much for that support. It means a lot for those people. Now this spring the VA will open its new Anchorage outpatient clinic. That's good news for veterans in South Central. But vets in rural Alaska are still struggling. They're still struggling to get any service from the VA at all. And too many of our older disabled veterans are still told, you know, you got to get on the airplane to go for care in Seattle. I put language in the VA appropriations bill last year that explicitly authorizes the VA to pay for care at native health care facilities that serve rural Alaska. And I'm also challenging the VA's position that its regulations require that Alaska veterans travel if the VA can't provide their care in Alaska. Nowhere else in this country does the VA require a veteran to fly 2,000 miles to access their earned benefits. This is wrong, and it's simply time that they stop doing this to our veterans. So we keep working on that. So many other issues with regards to our veterans. In 2011, the VA has established a goal of providing 90% of veterans a burial option within 75 miles of their home. It's time that the VA fulfills that goal in Alaska with a state veterans cemetery there in the interior. David, I know you've been working on this. I know that the Interior delegation has worked very, very hard in this, and I thank you for that. Another VA national goal is to significantly reduce the rate of homeless veterans, especially a problem in Anchorage. I want to work with the VA and the community on some more aggressive solutions there. The federal government also has undertaken an obligation to provide medical care for Alaska's seniors who paid in to Medicare. But we all recognize a Medicare card doesn't do you any good if you don't have a doctor who can see you. The government's fallen on this obligation. Thanks to a 35% fix in Medicare reimbursement rates in 2008, we were able to make it possible for Alaska's doctors to keep their existing Medicare patients. And this has helped in Anchorage and Fairbanks, but it doesn't help in new Medicare patients who are seeking a doctor. Any health care reform, and as you know, this is still underway in Washington, but any health care reform that we advance must address the issue of access to care that so many of our rural states face. And I'll tell you, cutting $500 billion from Medicare, as the Senate bill does, is not going to help us here in Alaska. It's just not going to help. I want to recognize the efforts that are going on here in the legislature. I know that Les, we had a chance to talk about the effort that you are making with the Medicare fund, and I know Kevin, I don't see Kevin right there in front of me, focused on the Medicare facility, which I think we recognize can help make a difference in some of these communities where we are experiencing really crisis situations with access to care. So I look forward to working with you on these initiatives. Now, we recognize that while the federal government has a critical and a welcome role in our state, we must be wary of the tendency of the federal bureaucracy to overreach. One of the hot topics in snowy Washington these days is that of climate change. And when I go out and visit communities like Shishmaref and Newtok, I appreciate that we need to address the impacts of a changing climate. The responsibility, though, for establishing climate policy rests with the elected representatives in Congress, not unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats at the EPA. Right now, Right now, the EPA is poised to enact regulations to limit greenhouse gas emissions, which is a move that could have economically devastating consequences to our economy. Here in Alaska, the impacts of EPA regulations on a gas pipeline, to taps, to any new oil development, to businesses that are extremely diverse, whether it's a hospital or a fish processor. It makes it clear that the EPA's endangerment finding really opens up the back door to regulations that will damage the very foundations and future of our state's economy. And it's not just here in Alaska where we're concerned about this. This is all across the country. State and local officials, labor unions, farmers, fish processors, chambers of commerce, taxpayer advocates, they've all weighed in to oppose the EPA's proposed regulations. You've got environmental groups, you've got members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, both House and Senate. The administrator of the EPA all agree that going the route of EPA regulations is far from the best way to address the challenge that is posed by a warming climate. I do appreciate the focus that, again, the legislature is giving to this issue. I've had a chance to talk with Bill Stoltz about this and some of the others as we advance. But I think working together and with all members of the delegation, hopefully we can be effective in this regard. Another area where Alaskans feel the weight of the government hand is with the Endangered Species Act. The Parnell administration has wisely questioned the ESA decisions concerning polar bears, beluga whales, many other species that are being considered for listing. I know Charisse Millett has been working on a resolution as it relates to the beluga. We know that in Cook Inlet, you've got a military that depends upon the port of Anchorage to move troops, move equipment from Alaska to battlefields around the world. And the implication of a critical habitat designation within Cook Inlet on their ability to continue operations creates a level of uncertainty. And equally important within that area is the commercial operations. We've got the state's largest regional port, the fisheries, the oil and gas industry within the inlet. Now, I don't question at all the importance of finding solutions to our climate issues, nor the need to protect our diverse species of marine mammals. I think that there are solutions to be found in scientific research and thoughtfully crafted government responses, but I do reject heavy-handed regulations that are abruptly I've talked a lot this morning about the challenges that we face, and they are weighty challenges. But we've faced weighty challenges before. We're a state that teaches our children that there's nothing that they can't achieve. We're a young state. We recognize that one person truly can make a difference. Look at what we've produced. We've produced 3 MacArthur Genius Fellows in recent years. We continue to develop terrific Olympian athletes. I was just so pleased this morning to see Kikun, 8th place, Olympic best. I mean, we do well here. We do very well. We've been blessed with a very engaged citizenry and a group of citizen legislators who are ideologically diverse. I think that's fair to say, but you manage to come together to make things happen and make good things happen. And I will tell you, I come back to this body with fondness, but I can't come back to this body without thinking about who used to be right behind that pillar there. And I think no one better exemplifies that spirit of that citizen legislator better than Richard Foster. Richard really represented the very best of Alaska. And perhaps there was no other legislator that better represented the coalition politics that keeps this body somewhat grounded than Richard. He's elected a Democrat. He caucuses with the Republicans as he attempted to serve his constituents in rural Alaska as best he could. And I think we really valued his independent spirit. I think he made us better as a body. And I can remember some of the debates and the discussions, whether it was in caucus or on the floor, and when things got a little heated, Richard was there with some kind of a joke from the back, or he'd slip a note up, or there would be some kind of just very thoughtful gesture. And of course, you would always dread your birthday, because Richard would stand, surprisingly, from the back and seek recognition, and after a very witty tribute, or perhaps not so witty, but funny nonetheless, he would lead everybody in singing Happy Birthday, and he really did seem to make our differences perhaps less important, and we certainly miss him, and his memory inspires us to do better for Alaska's people. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, I'm happy to take questions. I promised that I was going to keep my comments shorter this year, and I didn't. I'm sorry. But I'm pleased to be with you and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Murkowski. We'll start with Representative Stoltz.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Murkowski. And I assume you're going to be traveling around the state a little this year. I'd be remiss in my Chamber of Commerce duties if I didn't tell you the youth shoot, first Saturday in June in Birchwood, 75th anniversary of Colony Settlement in Matanuska Valley. And Susie Gorski would want me to tell you you're always a welcome guest at our Bear Paw. But on ESA, I appreciate the gift from DC and Dan Sullivan. We have two pretty decent Dan Sullivans working for it, and I have been impressed with his knowledge of ESA issues, and I want to give him all the tools. And what are some of the threats specifically that may be coming from DC we may need to respond to, and do your colleagues really get it? You know, in the 70s when I was in high school, we heard the yell of the snail darter, and with some of the ESA issues, that almost sounds like it's a comparative whimper now with the impacts on our economy and our future. So.
Well, I appreciate the question, and let Susie know.
What was the question? We're not really sure, Senator.
ESA.
Yes.
ESA in general, but would you please let Susie know that I think I've got the Bear Paw on the schedule, and I'm looking forward to the slippery salmon derby, or whatever it is where you carry that humpy around. Anyway, it's an incredible celebration for those of you who have not been out to the Bear Paw Festival in Eagle River. Enough for our Chamber of Commerce plug. When we talk about what is happening with the ESA and the implications here in Alaska, I don't think I need to educate any of you. You are all very plugged into the potential threats, whether it's with polar bear, the beluga, the walrus, the stellar sea lions. We're waiting for a determination on that within the next couple of weeks. Our reality is it impacts our daily life. It impacts our ability to engage in any level of economic opportunity. But this is not just Alaska. California is really up in arms about what they consider to be overreach coming from the agencies using the ESA, Endangered Species Act, as a tool. In the San Joaquin Valley right now, they have whole areas of farmland, whether it's fruit trees or nuts or whatever the crops are, that are going under because they don't have water. Well, it's not because of droughts, it's because of a smelt that it's been determined they will not turn on the water to provide for the agricultural needs for the jobs for the families that live in that valley. And it's a real standoff. And it's not too much further down in California, where there is another community that is effectively being shut down because of the risk, the threat to a fly. Now, I didn't get the name of the fly or whether it was a special kind of a fly, but it is causing people, and you know, California is not known to be a bastion of conservatism, but the people in California are looking at this and saying, whoa, wait a minute. Well, we want to ensure that we're providing for our environment. What are you going to do about all of these jobs that are now going under? What are you doing about these livelihoods, these whole parts of our state that are being shut down by the ESA? I believe that we are at a point, I don't know if it's the tipping point or the boiling point yet, or whether we're close yet, but I think you are going to see a pushback from people across the country who are looking at this and saying, is this a level of overreach that is just unacceptable? And do we need to change, through legislation, aspects of the Endangered Species Act? I believe so.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator, you have come and spoke to us many times in the last few years, and you've been kind of warning us as each time a little stronger that what Washington perceives Alaska to be, and that we're not necessarily helping ourselves as much as we could. And we have something that's coming up hopefully on the ballot this fall, and if that passes, and then we have our own transportation infrastructure fund, will that make it a little bit easier for you in Washington?
Everything that you all do here makes it easier for me there. That's and you know, you probably are saying the same thing. It helps if Lisa gets more back there because it's less that we have to do here. It's a coordinated effort, or it should be a coordinated effort. I think it is important that we as a state shoulder those responsibilities that the states should be taking on. Whether it's in the area of transportation and road or public safety. As I went through in my address, there are areas of federal responsibility because of our constituency, whether it's our native populations, our veterans, our seniors. There are responsibilities that we in the state, we in the federal government should be assisting Alaska with. But there is much, much more that I think you can be doing to provide for that level of support. We are still the poster child for our numbers being out of whack, particularly when it comes to transportation funding. Because of the formula, you look at Alaska and it's like, wow, they're getting way too much money there. And it's you got to make the argument. You have to educate each person as you go. I think that the effort that is out there for Alaska to take up and shoulder a greater share of transportation dollars is one that is viewed favorably. I'm going to detour, if I just may, a little bit because it's such a fascinating thing. Right now, states are really in trouble. Really in trouble. California is looking for a bailout. States are really strapped. And where are they going? They're looking to the federal government for help. You've all read about the Snowmageddon in Washington, D.C. We shut down the government for 4 or 5 days, and it's still a mess back there. But the states of Virginia and Maryland blew their snow plowing budgets within a couple days. They have appealed to the federal government for emergency federal assistance, basically seeking to be bailed out for not anticipating their snow removal needs. So everything that the states can do on their own is probably a better thing.
Thank you, Senator. I think we have time for 2 more questions, one from Representative Crawford and then Senator Bundy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator, for coming once again, and it's always good to see you here. I know you're bracing for the win question, but as important as that is, I have another concern this morning, a gathering cloud on our horizon. And when it was passed, it was called the Pension Protection Act. The way it's playing out, it more aptly would have been named the Pension Destruction Act. I know that wasn't the intention when it was passed, but because of our financial debacle that we went through and the trillions of dollars of lost investment in the stock market and all, our pensions are in trouble, real trouble. And we need more time, and we need flexibility to let those pensions right themselves And the way the Pension Protection Act is written, it's taken us right down the tubes. So we need your help.
Well, you've got my word here that I'm going to help you on it. This is something that I sit on the HELP Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions. We have not as a committee, because health reform has been such a focal point of what has gone on, and prior to that, education issues. In the meantime, as you point out, what is happening with pension funds around the country has been nothing short of frightening because of the direction that it is taking. I think that it is as significant as what we saw last year within the mortgage markets, with people losing their houses as they were. I think this is that next crisis just waiting to happen. We actually had a small provision in the first iteration of a jobs package. It was agreed to. It was a bipartisan package that was introduced just last week, just before we broke, that would have helped to, on a limited basis, provide a little bit more flexibility to some of the pension plans. What has happened now, Senator Reid has pulled that package down and has decided to go with a much more slimmed down version of the initial jobs bill. I'm hopeful that when there is a second run at the jobs bill, which there will be, it's just a question of when, that perhaps we can utilize that vehicle to advance some more substantive fixes. But it is an issue that, again, I would agree with you. It's not just here in Alaska where we're going to see families panicked, but throughout the country. And I think we know that far too many of these plans are on the edge, and we have the ability at the federal level to allow for a level of flexibility, give them some breathing space that currently they don't have into the law. So I intend to be working on that initiative, and I'd love to coordinate with you, those in the legislature that are working on this, to make sure that we're adequately addressing the concerns of the Alaskans and the funds here. Thank you,
Senator. And the final succinct question will be from Senator Bundy.
Yeah, have I got that pothole fixed on your road yet?
My senator.
I would ask your help, too. Alaskans are very concerned about states' rights and state sovereignty. And up along Yukon River, Yukon-Charlie National Area, there's been encroachment on our citizens by the National Park Service to the point where they're usurping, I think, some of our state sovereignty in navigable waters. We're getting to the point where we may have to sue, the state may have to sue the federal government. Obviously, we'd rather that a more simple fix, and I would ask that you investigate what's going on there. Bureaucracies tend to grow unless there's some pushback, and I would ask you to push back on them.
Well, let us work with you as you advance. It probably wouldn't be you, because it would be the state of Alaska that would be moving forward with any litigation on this. This is not just up in the interior parts. We see this in other areas of the federal government where, again, it's a level of encroachment, a level of overreach, just a level of pushing, where as Alaskans we would say that's not acceptable. It's not been acceptable in the past, and we won't allow it to advance further. So I have not had a conversation with whether it's Dan Sullivan or the governor in terms of whether or not they plan on proceeding. But we've got pretty good discussions between our offices and the administration, so we'll follow through with it. Appreciate the heads up.
Thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate the time you spent with us. I'd ask Senator McGuire and Representative Herron if they would come forward and escort you out. And thank you very much.
Thank you for the time.
Of course.
Appreciate it. Sorry I took so long again.
This special broadcast of U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski's address to the Alaska State Legislature has been produced by KTOO Television, Juneau, and the Alaska Public Radio Network. Thank you for joining us.